passing on Netflix was a bit disappointing. But before I get into my review of this Netflix original, please consider this your spoiler warning, because I will be talking spoiler-ish. And I don't know why my voice went up that high, but there we go. So let's get on to the review. So let's just go with a little synopsis or just a little rundown of the plot. So this movie tries to deal with racism around the 1930-ish. It seems like maybe a little bit earlier, maybe the 1920s. And I get what it's trying to do. But before I get into the full, at least my review of it. So we come in contact with Valkyries. If you don't know Valkyrie from Thor Ragnarok, we get introduced to Tessa Thompson's character and her husband, and we get to know that she's really involved in the African American community. She is making dances and is just really wants to be part of the community. So we get introduced to her friend Claire. And she's married to, we find out Claire, and she's very beautiful or whatnot. At least this movie tries to tell us that, even though she is a beautiful woman, but she's married to a white man, John, which he's a racist, just to be blunt and upfront and getting to the point. So he's a bit racist, or he's not a bit racist, he is racist, and he doesn't like African Americans. He calls them the N-word, and he also calls them, that he just doesn't like it. So early on in the movie, we get introduced to Claire and John, and we get a feeling that Claire wants to be white only because of a remark that John says, saying about how he despises the African Americans, and that his wife doesn't have any black in her. And she goes, well, what if I had a little bit? And he's like, oh, but you won't. Da, 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 da. So we get the impression, at least the movie tries to give us the impression that Claire is almost ashamed of being African American, because she is. She was a childhood friend of Valkyrie. I'm just going to call her Irene, not Valkyrie. Irene, which is played by Tessa Thompson. And so Tessa knows that Claire is African American, and we go on, she starts trying to butt into her life, and you're like, oh my God, there's going to be drama because, Claire's husband is racist, and she's trying to, stick with Irene and become friends again. Towards the end of the movie, before we get to the end, so Irene reluctantly starts letting Claire go to some of her functions, to some dances, starts hanging around her kids and her and just around her family. And we start realizing that Irene actually is kind of jealous, and we find out of Claire, and we find out that Claire really wants to be not be black again, but wants to go back home, wants to be around African Americans, wants to be around, I don't want to say her people, but she just wants to be more infused into what she is, which is an African American. And she loves the spirit, the ambiance, the food, the culture. She embraces it, but she just, was married. She was forcefully married to John, and in the beginning she's like, oh, he gives me everything I ever wanted, but she's still unhappy. Though as the movie goes along, we find out that Irene has a black maid, helping her like cook dinner and raise the kids. So you start getting this different vibe halfway through the movie, where you're starting to see, like I said earlier, Tessa, Irene is jealous of Claire, because no matter where she takes her, she becomes the center of attention. And why wouldn't she? Claire is very bubbly, very beautiful, very outgoing, very charismatic, and she just sucks out she's not sucks out, she just absorbs and exudes the energy and again becomes the focus in every room. So you start acknowledging how Tessa is jealous of her and says, "Oh, you're so beautiful, and you are, all these positive things." So then we start realizing that Irene is very self-conscious. She is very she hates some of her features of herself, being black, being an African American woman. She kind of hates some of those things in her, and she is the one that wants to be white, wants to be, I mean, not maybe not white, but is ashamed of who she is. And towards the end, again, spoiler warning, it's really weird the way this was shot, but they're in a party, and sure enough, her husband, or Claire's husband, finds out that she is at this party with nothing but African Americans in this high-rise hotel. And he's angry. He's like, "Oh, you lied to me." And he's making a big old scene, and this lady comes in and she goes, "Look, you're the only white man in a room full of black people, so I would calm down." And he tries to go towards his wife, to like confront her aggressively, and then we see Irene push Claire outside of the window and falls to her death. It's so quick, no one realizes that she did this, but she did it. And the movie does a really good job in letting us know that she planned it, and she was just kind of acting at the end that she feels remorse, even though, because she was jealous that Claire was getting too close to Irene's husband. How Claire was trying to almost replace Irene in functions. Everyone was asking for Claire, no longer Irene. So Irene started feeling like she was replaceable. So I did probably a horrible job in my synopsis of the plot, but go check out the movie and decide for yourself. It's not a long watch. It's around an hour and 45 minutes to be exact. I think probably a little shorter than that. So basically that's it. So my whole thing is that this movie, though I respect what it's trying to do and show us but show us racism, how it was back then, and how people of all, even though we're dealing with African Americans in this, or the African American and white dynamic, I think everyone, I knew someone that was Hispanic that had a hard time relating to Hispanics, and they always wanted to be a different race, wanted to be white. I've had Hispanic friends that tried to act black, or that embrace the black culture, or embrace the Asian culture. I think we all deal with some identity crisis within our own, and I don't know if it's a bad thing or if it's a good thing. I guess it's to the beholder. I guess if you think it's bad, I know a lot of people do what the word escapes me but like, if I would put braids in my hair, being a Hispanic man, cultural appropriation, that's what it is. And they have a really hard time with that. And I get it, and to each their own. I'm not going to sit here and say, yes, it's bad, no, it's not. But I think we all, no matter what race we are, we know people in our own race that have wanted to be something other than what they were. Whether it's right, whether it's wrong, that's a discussion for another channel to have and to debate. So I respect the fact that this movie's trying to do it, though I think they were trying to be too cute with it. And it gets lost in the bad pacing. Now, the bad pacing, I don't think it's by accident. I think they did it by choice. This movie is done in a very old school type of way, like pre-Desi Arnaz. And all I thought throughout this movie was, thank God Desi Arnaz developed a new way of shooting a scene with multiple cameras and multiple angles, because this just has one camera shooting from one angle, and you're stuck looking at that angle. And then their hard cuts, the way that it's acted, it's very 1920s, very 1930s like. And in that artistic manner, I think it was good. I got what it was doing, but it creates a very bad pacing issue where you're like, oh my God, this movie is so boring. The best part as far as pacing was the last 5 minutes of this movie, and that's not a good thing. Again, I think it was just, it got caught up in trying to be too new, too nuanced, and trying to say, hey, look, we're going to bring this story in a 1930s type of way and using 1930s filming to bring this story, which I think that was the mistake. If you would have just stuck with the way we do shows now and just done the 1930s era and picked up the pace a little bit, I think it would have flowed a lot better, at least for the common viewer like us that we're just trying to follow along and see what's going on. The plot is very simple, even though, again, in my synopsis, it wasn't Wallace delivered, but or broken down. But I really leave that up to you guys, because honestly, like we know in many movies, you could watch something, 100 people could watch something, and you'll get 100 different descriptions and feelings of how they felt about that movie. So I recommend you go and look at it for yourself. It's just like I said. The pacing is just awful. And again, because it's shot in a 1920s, 1930s type of way, that is inevitable. And the acting is okay, but over the top, again, trying to hold true to a 1930s, 1920s type of acting, but you're just like kind of taken off by it. Even though the acting from the actors, they did a great job and they should be commended for being so great at their craft, because they all did a great job in performing those roles. But I just think it could have been done a little bit better, and I think the message that it was trying to deliver gets lost in all the other stuff because it tries to be too artsy fartsy with it, when I think they just should have focused on the message and trying to show that in its fullness, as opposed to kind of tiptoeing around it and making it more confusing than it had to be. And by confusing, I don't mean like a lot. The fact that they try to misdirect it and saying, oh, hey, look at this woman, she hates being black, and yet we find out towards the end that, hey, it's actually this lead actress is the one that's kind of ashamed of who she is and her features, and is jealous over her friend. So it's like a murder mystery movie kind of, but it does it in a very, very poor way. The score, the soundtrack is non-existent in this thing. Honestly, I couldn't remember it, even if there was one. The first 10-15 minutes are so long. They are nothing. I thought for a second, I thought it was a silent movie. I was like, holy crap, there's no words in this. But anyways, so for me, this movie was a D+. It did so much bad that I just couldn't get past those. So for me, this movie was a D+. Unfortunately, maybe you guys will find it a little bit higher than that, maybe lower than that. But anyways, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And like always, that's a wrap.